Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Apostolic Everyday Podcast. Thank you for joining me again today for this episode of the podcast. Tonight, I've got on the podcast a young man that I respect very much and have watched grow into the man of God that he is today. And I appreciate him coming on. Today on the podcast, we have Brother Aaron Irby, and we're excited that he's here with us this evening on the podcast. Bro, glad you're here.
Glad to be here, Brother Jones.
Let's start off with get to know you a little bit. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, my name's Aaron Irby. My wife is Zoe Irby. We have one child, Millie. She's sweet. She has a big personality. Of course, you know that.
Yeah.
She loves you and your wife. She loves your wife more
than me. Let's just be honest.
She loves you too. But yeah, we was raised in the Mississippi Delta. I'm the youth pastor there at Brandon United Pentecostal Church here in Brandon, Mississippi. My father, Ken Irby, and Pamela Irby is also pastoring there and have been, I think, for the past 9 years. And we've been the youth pastor there for the past 2 years. It's been a blessing. God's done a lot of things, and he's done it fast.
Yeah.
But we're learning.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get knocked in the head while we're learning, but we get back up and we keep going.
Yep.
And it's a journey. It's a journey for knowledge and wisdom and understanding, and that's my life story.
Yeah.
It's a miracle in itself. If you had an understanding of my life. So
yeah. So you said you grew up in the Delta. So tell us a little bit about your childhood. Of course, we've had your dad on the podcast, Pastor Ken Irby, not too long ago. And so I thought we'd bring his protege on here. But tell us a bit about your childhood growing up, what that was like for you. Or, were you raised in the church? Of course, I would say so because everybody knows your dad. But being raised in the church and around the church, what was your childhood like?
Yeah. Being raised in Mississippi Delta, you have to think there's not much to do.
Right.
So hunting, fishing, all of those small town things that, we done. And, my dad made sure and my mom made sure that anything that was available for us to do as far as that and as far as in the confines of what we believed, he gave us that opportunity and helped us and let us do and let us enjoy that stuff. But being a PK, it's tough.
Yeah.
Especially when, our dad was a dedicated man of God.
Yes, sir.
He was dedicated, and we were at that church. If prayer meeting was going on, all three of us kids were at prayer meeting.
Right.
If peanut brittle was going on, all three kids were at peanut brittle.
Yes, sir.
Whatever was going on at the church, we were there.
Right.
And sometimes I believe that was a little draining.
Yeah.
For us at times. But I believe it instilled something inside of all three of us. But then again, to be honest, if we are being honest, I believe it caused some things. There were some damages there that were caused because we were so close to things.
Yeah.
That at a young age we were vulnerable and seeing some things that inside the operation of the church that happened in all churches, but maybe because we were so young and so close to it, hurt us at a very young age.
Sure. Well, we experienced that too as kids, my brothers and I, and we too were like you guys. If there was something going on, we were there. Of course, a lot of times, most of our childhood, especially 2 stints of it, we were pastors' kids, so we saw a lot too. Mom and Dad tried to shelter us from a lot, but I mean, there's just some things you're vulnerable to, and you see because you're exposed to it. but as a child, you grew up hunting and fishing. So that was something, it's still a big part of your life today.
That's right.
You can, of course, Brandon, if people know anything about Brandon, Mississippi, it's more of a, it's a city. And then you guys kind of live outside of Brandon, but you can take the country boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of him.
That's right.
What was growing up like? Tell us go in a little bit more detail about that. Like, where did y'all hunt and fish, and what did that look like for y'all?
Well, we of course, anywhere in the Mississippi Delta, you can catch a fish.
Yeah.
If there's water, we caught fish in the ditch. We went to ponds, we went to lakes, we went to the Mississippi River. My dad would take us tight lining on the river, anywhere. My brother, he went, but he didn't quite have the patience. He was wanting to do something. He was a workaholic, so that's what he was into doing. So he couldn't sit still long enough to do it. But me and my dad and my sister, we'd sit there and we'd fish, all night or all day. And then we had a camp in Kosciuszko that we had all traveled to. And that was kind of like a family oriented thing, especially when my grandparents were around and my grandfather, my mom's dad was around. That was a big thing for our family. We had Thanksgiving there. We would go Christmas Day. We had Christmas at our house, and then we would go spend the next 3 or 4 days up there, with the whole family. And so that was that's what we did every year.
Yeah.
Until
so it kind of become a family tradition type thing.
Yeah. That's where we spent our time, and it was fun. We had a good childhood. I talked to a lot of young people. I talked to a lot of kids, even talking to my wife, and I'm telling her all of these stories and all these things and she's like, "Wow, you have so many stories." My parents really made sure that they gave us the most fulfillment of a childhood, and every and everything that we could do, they gave us an opportunity to do it as far as the outdoors and things like that. They really spent a lot of time with us. I remember my dad, we had a swimming pool, and when we lived in the Delta, and I remember fun stuff like this, like my dad drove a Z71 Chevrolet. It was loud, and we'd know when he was pulling up. We'd all be in there doing homework or something, or we'd be sitting on the back porch, and we hear him blow, 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 blow when he'd throw in park. And then all of a sudden you hear that gate open up, and you hear them little legs close, work clothes and everything. He'd dive off in that pool. And so that was fun, because of course the whole family's going to jump in and just have fun.
Yeah.
And, stuff like that, we just, our parents made sure that they spent that time with us.
That quality time.
That really, that created us to be a strong family.
Yeah.
And we operate good together.
Well, just so I've known you guys up close and personal since probably 2015 was the first time I met you, and of course in a revival I preached for your dad. And from the very get-go, the one thing I saw was the closeness of your family. So hearing some of these stories of how that kind of formed about and you guys are still close to this day. You guys are close knit. Like you guys epitomize what it means to be close. And that was, you can tell that's just not something that happened overnight. It was years of fun and that went on. So that's awesome. So growing up in the church, you shared a little bit about that in Greenville. Your dad was a minister there in the church. How did that develop for you? When did you receive the Holy Ghost for the first time? Like, what was that like for you growing up in the church?
Oh, I think I was 7 years old when I received the baptism of the Holy Ghost with the evidence of speaking in tongues. And I was born in Texas. I was born in Jacksonville, Texas, and Rush, Texas. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta. I think at age 3, we moved back to the Delta, and I was raised there most of my life. And then we moved back at some point, but we went back and forth. My dad went down there. He felt the call to go, and the church was in need of some help down there. And it feels like my dad, everywhere in his life, he was picking up the pieces, going somewhere to put the pieces back together.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, that shows in my life too. But
Right.
so we went back to Texas, and we was there. I think I was 7, or it might have been 7 or 8 years old, and I was in the back seat, and we was on our way to the Mexican restaurant. Believe that, apostolic, get the Holy Ghost on the
Oh
way to
man.
Mexican.
Mexican is the place,
I
bro.
mean, you can look at me, brother. I look like I got the Holy Ghost on the way to the Mexican restaurant. But yeah, I mean, I was in the back, and I was just singing some songs that I'd learned in Sunday school. And man, the Holy Ghost just come all over me, and man, I just began to speak in other tongues, and it was on me so strong that we was in there trying to eat, and my parents said I was just shaking at the table, and I couldn't even eat, and that's when I first received the baptism of the Holy Ghost, and I'd been baptized shortly after that, and I've been baptized, I think, like 3 times.
You're not the only one.
That's it.
So you grew up, you received the Holy Ghost at 7, but somewhere along the way you kind of drifted from that. Do you remember the moment that that kind of started, or was it just like I mean, we all know it's a gradual thing, but do you remember like those moments of when it started, and then kind of walk us through that, then to what that led to? Because you have a beautiful testimony from growing up in the church to addiction, and then back from out of that into freedom. But that was a pretty long process of time there.
Well, I would say at the age of probably 11 or 12 years old, that's when it initially started to happen. I was exposed to some things. Both sides of my parents' family was not in church. And so I was exposed to some things, of course, through friends as well. But really, I was exposed through things through family. I had seen some things. Close family had some dealings with drugs, and a lot of dealings with drugs. And so I was exposed to a lot there at an early age. Exposed to a lot of, and if we're just being real, pornography, music,
right?
But I believe, and if we're just being honest here, it started with music for me. It started with me rebelling, and it started with music and being exposed to that atmosphere and those people and those things, and then that music. And I tell people all the time is I didn't start doing those things until I was listening to those things first.
Right.
It's when I began listening to those things that I started doing those things.
Yeah.
And so it started. I was listening to that stuff, and I guess I think age 14 or 13 or 14. I would like to use the excuse that it was church hurt. But we all know that at the end of the day, there is a choice that we have to make.
Exactly.
But there, it is a good way to use. But it did have an impact too, because we've seen a church split at a very young age, a very brutal church split there in the Delta where we were, and at a very young age, we've seen people that we grew up with, that we thought the world of, that we looked at as family, that we loved very dearly, look with hate towards each other, literally on each side of the church. It was pretty rough, at a very young age, and not only one church split, but 2 pretty rough church splits that my dad was heavily involved in.
Trying to salvage and stuff,
and help putting the pieces back together. And so you got to think, especially the atmosphere and the emotions of our home. Not that they didn't try their best to shelter us from that, but as kids, we felt that. We felt what mom and dad felt. The atmosphere that was in our home when they was in there praying. We felt and heard the tears, and heard the cries and the tears for all of that we felt. And so that had an impact too. And I guess it got me thinking, what are we doing? If I could see all of these people put on this persona, I guess, for all of these years, like there's nothing going on, and then all of a sudden, boom, They hate each other
Right.
over
Right.
paint on the wall.
Yeah.
Is this real?
Right.
And it felt like a good excuse, and it was. I guess that was really when it really started, and then I was getting in a lot of trouble there at the church school. End up getting to the point where they no longer wanted me there at the church school, rightfully so.
Right.
I
Yeah.
had done some things, fighting, a lot of things.
Right. Yeah.
I was probably 16 when I got, I guess, kicked out of there. I went to public school, and man, that did it.
That did it. Yeah.
It did. I was exposed to a lot more.
Well, you weren't in that controlled environment anymore.
That's right.
And so there was a lot of exposure to a lot of things that maybe you had limited access to at one point. Now it's like, oh man, here it is. It's open.
And so, of course, I'd already had my dealings with alcohol and some stuff, just small, tobacco use, petty. I say petty things, but when I look at the bigger picture of the things that I started doing, it was small then, but they're not small things.
Right.
They're gateway.
Yeah.
So they would call it loud now, but especially when I got into public school, a lot of people, for me, a lot of people in my school and around my age group, they started smoking marijuana or having dealings with stuff like that. Well, I guess not me. I went straight to, I guess, the harder things, and then dealt with that later. And then I seen it have a greater impact on me. I started doing Adderall and cocaine, and then eventually methamphetamines, and then my family members was heavily involved in methamphetamine, and all of those things, and so that really, really opened the door, and I believe the atmosphere of those spirits that I was around during that time, had influence in some of that too, along with choice and rebellion that I was living in.
So how long so I know you said you started around the age of 14, experimenting, 14, 15, 16, kind of full blown getting kicked out of the school, going to public school, basically experimenting with all kinds of heavy drugs and things of that nature. How long of a process of time did that last for you? Because I know eventually you gave your life back to God. So what was the pattern? How many years of that? Kind of share a little bit of that. Like you started at around 16 with the heavy stuff, and then how old were you when you come back to God? And what did those years look like for you?
Man, I think 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep count. My wife knows exactly. She knows dates and everything, but us men, we don't.
Yeah, we don't keep up with those dates.
But I think 4 or 5 years ago, man, I don't even know how old I am. I think I was 23 or 24. And I'm 27 now. When I come back, and those years were rough.
Yeah.
There was a lot of good. There were still good moments, but there was moments of despair. I was heavy into drinking and partying. I mean, I guess you would say I was the cool kid. I hung out with all the the right people, all the right crowd. I was with all the right people doing the wrong things. Just hanging with the crowd, and I was drinking heavy. I was a real angry person, running from the call of God on my life, and at a very, very early age, I'd felt the call on my life. I failed to mention.
I was going to ask you that. Once we got it, but this is a good place to do it. How old were you when you felt that call of God?
Man, I was probably, it was right after. It wasn't long after I'd got the Holy Ghost.
So around 7, 8.
It was probably around 10 years old.
10.
Probably a couple years later. I remember, and I feel the Holy Ghost while I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
I guess just reliving that
moment.
I remember as a young kid, I would lay in the floor in my bedroom, and I would listen to the Katinas, and that song on Eagle's
yeah.
Wings, and I would just travail for hours and hours as a young child,
Yeah.
over souls and people in our family, and I mean for hours, and
Yeah.
and to the point where my mom, went to my dad and said, do you think he's okay? Is he all right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
something
unusual.
There's something wrong with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was just a spirit of God moving on me, and God would use me in intercessory for people, and and um and the call, he began to call me and draw me, um, to to reach lost people and to pray for people, and people like to say that, um, I felt the call to preach. Uh, I don't necessarily feel like that I had a call to preach. If you understand
Right.
what I mean, I felt a call to do whatever he wanted me to do.
Yeah.
Whether that be to preach, and whatever that might have been. When I got in church, I asked the Lord. I said, what is it? What is the purpose that you want me to do? What is it that you would have me to do? I'm not talking about a title that you could put on it. I'm not talking about some title that we've made up, but what do you want me to do, God?
Right.
And he directed me to the setting of scripture, where he was speaking to Peter. He said, Peter, when you're reconciled back, or when you come back,
Mm-hmm.
he said, go and strengthen your brethren.
Right.
And so that's what he told me. He said, you go and you strengthen your brethren. Whatever that looks like, Brother Jones,
Yeah.
that's what he's called me to do.
Which is ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever that
Ministering.
looks like.
Mm-hmm. So you felt that call at a young age, and so I know we talked about it a little bit, and the timeline, we've kind of got it off a little bit, but it's okay, because going back to, because I wanted to ask this a minute ago. So you the church heard of the church, that experiment, and then the call of God was kind of around that. It's probably within a couple years of each other. So would you say that probably contributed? You saw what was going on and you thought to yourself, well, if this is what ministry's like, or this is what church is like. I know you said, well, if this is what church is like, why aren't we faking like we got it all together? And then the next minute, all you see is people hating each other from across the church,
Right.
So would you say that was probably some that you ran from that because of some of this other that you saw? You just didn't really want to equate that together.
That is. And that a lot of that was too, but I do believe, the enemy begins to fight against, when you're equipped,
Yeah.
in God. That's when he begins to really fight at you.
Yeah.
And so I believe it was some to do with that too. And
Well, he used that to wedge between
Right.
you and God. He saw the call, he saw the potential, he saw the desire, he saw the burden, and he said, "Whoa, I've got to thwart that off." So he just used whatever he could use to get you to basically run, pretty
right.
much. So you ran 16, started doing heavy drugs. You through school, got out of school, and then once you graduated school or got out of school, what did that look like from that point forward?
Well, I actually went to Camp Shelby.
Gotcha.
And, I spent 6 months at Camp Shelby.
Okay.
And then I moved to Sontag, Mississippi with a friend. And, we had big dreams of doing big things, but really all we did was drink for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
we didn't do
what
anything.
big dreams?
Yeah.
Huh?
It didn't go anywhere. So I moved back home, and it kept spiraling. I ended up getting a job. I stopped messing with the heavy drugs, while I went to Camp Shelby,
Mhm.
of course, but I started drinking heavy again when I got back. And then I started doing Adderall again, here and there. And then I moved back, to the Delta, because I ain't doing nothing here in Monticello. So I was
Right.
going to move back.
Right.
And anyway, I landed a job. Really, I mean, it wasn't no career. It was a job.
Right.
My dad was a manager at this place, and I wasn't a very good student there. I would come in late. I would party and drink all night.
Right.
I end up, man, my dad ended up pastoring the church in Belzone. Our daughter worked that he was helping at. And so they was in between there all the time. And they end up eventually, getting the church in Brandon. And so
Right.
they was in the transition of moving.
Right.
And then I was messing with heavy drugs again. But I ended up, somebody walked in the bathroom. I didn't pass out on the floor. I didn't fall asleep. I passed out on the floor.
Right.
And hit me in the door with a head. So I got fired.
Oh, wow, bro.
Yeah. I mean,
we're laughing about it, but really that's the sad side of
That's
addiction.
it.
It's the sad side of addiction. So you got fired, found passed out in the bathroom, got fired.
That's it. And those people are friends of my family. But they know my story now.
Yeah.
And we love them. But my parents ended up moving down here. I stayed with my grandmother for a while. Oh, and things got bad.
Yeah.
Because that's where the other side of the family was. My uncle.
Yeah.
And all of them that was heavily involved with a lot of dark things. And so my life really spiraled down. There was what had happened, Brother Jones, is my covering had left.
Right.
And so when that covering had left, it's all access.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the devil's playground.
Yeah.
I was getting in trouble with the law. I was even to the point where I was manufacturing some drugs.
Right.
Myself and doing those drugs. And it was bad. I would stay up for weeks. Or a week, 7 day, 8 days, going nowhere.
Right.
End up coming, rescue me. I didn't talk to my parents for like 3 months.
Right.
When they left. And you'll hear it. My mom, she speaks about that sometimes, but
yeah.
End up, I guess busting out of all of that. And I come down here to Brandon and, I kind of went back and forth, and I ended up getting a job on the towboat, but it separated me from the Delta. And
Right.
that was the first transitional part of me coming back. Because when I come down here to Brandon, it wasn't long that I ended up coming to a service that they was having here in Brandon. And I remember that service that they had, and my dad, I remember the message that he preached, and he preached receiving the mantle of the previous generation.
Right.
And son, I'll cry thinking about it right now. I was sitting in the back row and long hair, just
doing your thing.
Yeah, doing my thing. I just showed up, just to, and I remember he come back there and he laid his coat across my back.
Yeah.
Oh man. That was the first time I prayed back through.
Right.
In a long time.
A long time.
But it was never the same. I never went back the same. That was the first transitional moment that of me coming back
out of addiction,
out of those things.
Yeah,
now, I went back.
Sure.
And it got worse and worse and worse.
But from that moment, it was pivotal. It was a difference.
There was a difference. I could never go back the same again.
Right.
The Bible says when I believe it says that when the enemy come and find a house
swept
clean and kept, he said it brings 7 more with him.
Yeah.
Well, that's what had happened there is when I went back to do those things, after praying back through, well, brother, I had a clean slate again. Come on, bring it on again. And so that's what happened. And it got worse. And I did that a couple times, but I was never the one, Brother Jones, to try to play with God, because I didn't think I had that many chances. So
right.
I wasn't the one to try to go, try to come back in church.
Be in and out,
try
in and
to,
out. Yeah.
I didn't want to play that game. I
Right.
was either going to do it
Yeah.
or I wasn't going to do
Yeah.
it. It just so happens they caught me back there. That's all.
They got you. That's all it was. You weren't there to play games.
My sister knows. I'm telling you right now. Every time I showed up to that church, she played "Let It Rain." I'd hear it, and they know that's my song.
That's your song.
I can't do it, but she would play that song, and I was like, "If you play that song again, I'm gonna walk out of here." But
I'm not letting you get me
yeah,
this time. I will walk out.
Right. But it was never the same from that moment on. Something changed inside of me. Something, a voice that I hadn't heard in a long time began to tug at me, began to speak to me again.
Right.
That small, still voice, as you talked about previously the other night in your message, that voice began to speak, and as it began to speak, I began to try to drown it out even more.
Yep.
With more drugs and more alcohol, and really got to a dark place, and met a bosom buddy doing it here.
Yeah.
My friend Marshall Prince.
Yeah.
I would love. It would be awesome for you to get him on here at some point.
I need to get him on here. I do.
But we went down a road, and a spiraling road downhill together, and of addiction and until it almost cost me my life.
Right.
And I'll stop there and let you ask anything else.
Well, but from there, so out of that, where, like, so eventually you did come back to God, and we were in Brandon when that happened. So I know a little bit of that, and you tell the story too. What was that? What was that like? So you were at your lowest. You prayed through, and you felt different, but you went back to addiction. You met Marshall, and you and Marshall were doing your thing. But then, what turned all that around for you? What made you come and it stick? How did that happen for you?
Do you want the details?
I want all of it.
Okay. I normally don't share this every detail with everyone, but it is my testimony.
Yeah.
And so I believe God gave it to me for a reason.
He did.
And the reason I don't share every detail is because some people don't really understand. But maybe they don't have to, Brother Jones. But what ended up happening is I'd gotten to a place where people don't really understand unless they study on the type of drugs that I was doing is very dark. The type of drugs that I was doing, that they even say that witches and warlocks and things like that use those drugs to try to communicate with the other side, and so it was a very dark atmosphere,
right,
that I was playing with, and unawares to me, because I couldn't see those things.
Right. It messes with the psyche.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so, I'd end up getting my own. My dad actually told me I was coming back and forth. He said, "You can't stay here anymore.
Right.
You got 3 months to get out."
Yeah.
And so I found a camper. Excuse me.
You're good.
I found a camper, and I rented that camper. Of course, I was working off, and I wasn't home but 2 weeks at a time anyway.
You were still in the towboat at the time.
That's right. I was working on a towboat, and I was going 30 days at a time. I was making good money, for what I was doing, and I would come home. I mean, sometimes, Brother Jones, I would come home and spend $1,000, $2,000 in one night.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't nothing to do that.
Yep.
But I remember I'd come home, and I think I'd bought 2 8-balls of cocaine. I'd been doing one of those. I'd been doing some coke, and I'd bought almost right at 3 grams of methamphetamine, a little bit of weed. I know this sounds like a lot, but
no,
I was getting ready for the 2 weeks. I was going to be home, and I went back to the camper, and Marshall was going to come over. We was going to play some cards, drink beer, and just hang out, and then probably go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I'd gotten, there's a certain fear that comes with doing those drugs, or paranoia, if you want to call it that.
Right.
Um, anyway, so I took I wouldn't go to prison necessarily as long for the coke in my mind. That's what I was thinking, as I would the meth. And so the meth was in some cellophane, which is a plastic wrap.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd put that cellophane in my mouth. And so for whatever reason, my mindset was, if the cops came in here, I could swallow it while I'm drinking or whatever.
Right.
But I believe it was the will of God, because my parents, they had asked the bishop, what are we doing? And he said, for the longest time, you've had your hand on his life,
Mm-hmm.
and God couldn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I want you to start praying, Lord, whatever it takes, let it happen.
Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, this is what, we got to this place.
Right.
And within 2 weeks of them saying, hey, Lord, whatever it takes. And people, as parents, and I'm speaking to parents that might listen to this right now, and your child or young person might get to the place where, God's going to ask you to, are you going to trust me with that young person?
Right.
Or are you going to trust me with your child?
Mm-hmm.
And it might look dark, but out of that darkness is going to be the biggest light that you've ever seen. And so in this very dark time, that bag had a little pinhole in it, and I was drinking, couldn't really tell. And so those drugs melted in my mouth, almost 3 grams of meth, enough to probably kill a horse. But
you're a pretty big boy, so
that's a lot, though, brother.
Oh yeah, I know. So that's bad.
It was a lot. And so I remember Marshall was on his way over there. Marshall had seen me paranoid before because I'd stayed up too long or something.
Mm-hmm.
So he thought I was just tripping out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd called him. I mean, my lungs were trying to keep up with my heart. My heart was racing so fast. And so I was gasping for air, and I'd called Marshall, and I told him, I said, I think I'm overdosing. And he was like, bro, you're just tripping.
Yeah. It's one addict to
he
another.
Was like, yeah. I mean, he'd see me. He's like, you tripping. He said, I'm going to grab you something to eat. And so he grabbed me a burger or something on the way there.
Wow.
And when he got there, he's like, look, you're too wild. You're wilding. He's like, and then he left. He was like, man, you're acting crazy. I mean, I was finna die.
Yeah.
And by the grace of God, I didn't.
Yeah.
Die, Brother John. I'd already had all kind of other drugs in my system.
Right.
And no telling what those things were laced with fentanyl and things like that they're doing nowadays. And so I got in my truck, and I went racing and running down through Clinton, through Jackson Boulevard, in the worst parts of South Jackson.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I hit ditches, hit signs. I mean, I just demolished my truck. Crazy things transpired in that time. In that moment, the Lord unveiled my eyes to the spirits that I was entertaining.
Right.
And so I was deep in pornography and things of that nature. And so all around me, I could see all of the images of those things. And, and people would say, that's all in your head. No, physically, brother, I seen all of these things around me. It was the Lord showing me the spirits that I was entertaining.
Right. Your eyes were, the scales pretty much.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, had come off your eyes.
And so traumatized is what I was. And so literally, and you think about that, people's like, well, you're just seeing stuff. No, this was real life I seen, because I'm sober now and I remember every detail.
Right.
I seen these things. And so God used that godly fear to push or draw them and let me see, hey, this is what you're really doing.
Yeah.
And so it ended up, Sister Zoe,
your wife now.
My wife now.
Was not your wife then.
Was not my wife then. Was not supposed to be talking to me.
Yeah.
But so I got hemmed up at a gas station. I'd parked the truck. I'd hit all the drugs or whatever. Police didn't catch me riding, so they couldn't do anything.
Right.
But they made me get away from the truck or whatever. But Sister Zoe, I say Sister Zoe, Zoe come got me against what she was told to do. She was not supposed to come get me, and she was going to take me home or take me somewhere. She was going to take me somewhere. Well, I was still seeing these things.
Right.
And so I was snatching the wheel. I mean, literally, evil spirits, brother, was in the back seat of our car. So I was snatching the steering wheel. I mean, trying to throw them out. I mean,
wow.
So Flowood police end up pulling us over, slam me on the ground. And I remember this very vividly when they slammed me on the ground. And I'm going to share this because you said every detail.
Right.
I remember they slammed me on the ground, and I'm sitting there under her car, and I remember there was a lady with no clothes on underneath her car. It was a spirit that God had allowed me to see. She turned to me and looked at me and said, just like that.
Wow.
And I feel chills just remembering and reliving those things. But that's just how real
that spirit world
is that we don't really understand what we're opening up the doors to, and young people don't understand what they're really playing with when they're doing things. But anyway, they ended up putting me in an ambulance. Zoe told them, "Hey, I think he's done a lot of drugs." They took me. And I remember being tormented as they strapped me down in that ambulance, tormented by this because I couldn't move, couldn't do anywhere. And they was in my face talking. I remember on the back glass, I could see them. I could see horrific things that was happening, going on. And anyway, I remember that they had put me in a room, and this was probably a day or so later. I went to sleep and woke up, and so people say, "Well, you were still tripping." No, I done went to sleep. And so I'm sitting in this room, and I find myself in this room, and all of a sudden there's three beings in this room with me. And they don't look like anything I've ever seen. They kind of look like something out of some Egyptian book that you would see. They had long locks, and they had gold bands on their arms, gold bands in their hair. And it was like I was frozen with fear, and I couldn't speak. And I remember the conversation that they was having in that room as they were sitting there, and I was sitting there, and I was literally petrified, because you got to think this was real. It was real to me because I was seeing it, because my eyes were unveiled to what was going on. And I remember the conversation that they were having, and they was discussing where I would be, and the wording that they was using, what part of Jackson that I would be stationed in, and what kind of drugs that I would be selling. It was like they was patterning the next part of my life,
of your life,
because I had turned my life over to them and what I was fixing to do for them. And I remember in that moment, in the moment, I had no understanding of what they was doing, but I remember a light that they was fixing to bore through my left ear. And I know this sounds crazy, but I remember in that moment them making me hold my ear. And I was sitting in this room holding my ear out of fear, trembling, crying, but couldn't speak, but holding that ear out as they was fixing to bore this light through my ear. And later would understand that that would go to mean that in those days, in the days of the Hebrews and things like that, if someone was to owe a debt to you for life, or to be your slave for life, that they would bore a hole in your ear. And so that was signification of me being in debt, or being a slave
to the addictions and to sin and the spirits
for life.
Wow.
And so in that moment, I remember I remember my parents. I remember seeing them come right through the back wall.
Yeah.
I remember everything that they had on. I remember the colors that they had on. My mom had a red dress on, and my dad had a white shirt and a red tie and a black suit. And they was holding hands, and they come through the back wall.
Wow.
And my mom was travailing with her hands up and down, praying in the spirit.
Yeah.
And my dad was speaking to those spirits, and he said, my son will not be a slave to you.
Wow.
He will be set free. He will be a minister of the gospel. He was prophesying those things to them.
Yeah.
And I believe that red was signification of the blood of Christ.
Yeah.
And they was coming in there, and that was the prayers that they had prayed and the covering that they had prayed over my life. But that is when I had went after that. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
But after that, I got out of the hospital about 5 days later, and I went and I went back to Greenville. Actually, I went back to my camper actually, and I still had an 8-ball left hid there of coke, and I went back to Greenville, and I went to the bar, and I didn't even drink anything. I just hit one bump of it, and immediately I started seeing those things again. Oh, I ran as fast as I could, and I got an Uber to my grandma's house, and I prayed, and I got down in my grandma's bathroom, and I prayed. I said, God, I don't want this anymore. And I met my parents. They was coming down to see Hunter's child there in Arkansas, and I hitched a ride back with them, and I remember my dad taking me in the back bedroom of his room, and he told me, he said, "Son, this is the last draw. The family don't know what to do. We don't really know what to do. We're everybody's done.
Yeah.
And, that right now you have to make a choice.
Yeah.
What you're going to do." He said, "Now God has the power to deliver you right now." He said, "And God will give me that power to pray over you."
Yeah.
He said, "But it's not going to be until you say that you want it."
Yeah.
And then I said out loud, I said, "I want it."
Yeah.
And then he wrapped me in his arms, and he held me right here in his chest and just prayed for me and held me right there. And I felt the loving arms of Christ wrap around me.
Yeah. And
I didn't go through any AA. I didn't go through any meetings.
Yeah.
I didn't go through, I was addicted to cigarettes, alcohol. There was nothing that I went through, Brother Jones. It was just Jesus Christ.
Yeah. That
delivered me from all of those things.
Yeah.
And set me free in that moment. And I just laid out on the floor and cried. And I mean, I never touched anything for the next year.
Yeah.
And for the next year, I touched nothing. Not no alcohol.
You were clean and sober.
I was clean and sober until I'd made a mistake and mess with nicotine or something. But I'll stop there and let you ask any questions after that. But
I mean, it's beautiful. I'm just listening to this, and you got me in tears over here. Which this story, every time I hear it, when I hear your mom tell it, you tell it, your dad tell it, it's a moving story because it's the beauty of redemption. It's the lowest of lows, and it's the beauty of redemption. Your story is probably, for somebody that I know personally, is one of the most traumatic experiences, from drugs and addiction to the most beautiful redemption story of Jesus. It's kind of like I preached at your dad's church this past Sunday night. You finally had an understanding of what made you complete. Right. And it wasn't the drugs, and it wasn't the alcohol, and it wasn't all the immoral things, the pornography, or any of that other stuff. It was him. It was him. Right. And when you finally made that decision to acknowledge that you had a problem, and that the only one that could help you fix that problem, and it took effort on your part.
I did.
But the only one that could help you fix that problem was him. And so from that, you came back to God. You gave your life to him, and you started serving him. And then in all of that, the very one that wasn't supposed to come get you became your wife. And you guys have a beautiful testimony as well. So share a little bit about that. How long after you came back to God did you guys get together and then get married? And
Well, so there was a point where she was not supposed to be talking to me,
right.
and I was trying not to talk to her, but she wouldn't leave me alone. She wouldn't leave me alone, and then anyway, we tried. We really did. We tried to stay away from each other. We tried to obey and leave each other alone, but man, it was tough.
Yeah.
We did for a while, and then we didn't for a while.
Right.
But it was back and forth, and when I really fully committed myself to God and not to man and what I was expected to do, is really when pastor said, okay.
Yeah.
He this is really what he said. Because after she come pick me up from the hospital.
Yeah.
Not supposed to.
Yeah.
He looked at me after all that, after I prayed through, and of course it took some time. He looked at me and he said, son, if you don't marry that girl, you're stupid.
Yeah. He just straight out told you, didn't he?
That's what he told me. But of course, it took some time. I had to get some roots about me,
right?
And I did, but it didn't take too long because she was hot on my tail.
Yeah,
and she knew what she wanted.
Yeah,
maybe she thought she knew what she wanted.
No.
She did. She's a great woman, and I try to be a good husband to her.
Yes, sir.
But there was a lot of things that a lot of trauma that came, a lot of hurt, a lot of walls that were built up from us not obeying and leaving each other alone until the right timing.
Right.
And if you're a young person watching this, listen to your pastor.
Yeah.
Listen to the authority in your life, because they know they're not dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
They're looking out for your best interest.
Well, they see the bigger picture.
That's right.
They see the bigger picture.
And so it would have saved us a lot of hurt. It would have saved us. There's some walls we had to tear down. Everybody else has this glamorous. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like you see pictures on Facebook and it seems that way.
Yeah, right.
But they have this glamorous story of this love story when they first got married. But our first year of marriage was pretty rough.
Yeah.
Because at around that point, I made some mistakes and I failed.
Sure. Well, you were a baby Christian. Even though you had been around it all your life, mm-hmm. you were still a baby Christian. So, the most common misconception is preachers' kids are supposed to sometimes be as mature as their parents, and they've been around this all their life. But we have to form a relationship for ourselves, and sometimes the pressure on us is harder because we should know better. But in reality, you were forming a relationship with God
right.
at an age of knowledge and trying to. You were coming out of so much. It's a miracle you didn't have more trouble than what you actually had walking through that process.
And I'm gonna tell you one thing that also hindered me, and I believe this is the reason. And I'm not saying that God chose for me to fall, because that's always our choice. But
right.
I believe God allows things to happen,
right,
to teach us certain things,
right.
And I believe He can keep us from certain things, but I also believe He can allow things because He knows we'll come back,
right.
And not that I fell away from the church. I always repented, but I had started making mistakes. But I had been invested. The first year of me getting in church so much in fasting and prayer and dedication, relationship, and until I had gotten so much revelation and all of these things. And even Paul says that he said it was sent to me a thorn in the flesh
Yep.
because of the great revelation that I had, so that I
Mhm.
wouldn't be arrogant or prideful or self-righteous or
Right.
whatever that he might become. But what I'd become, Brother Jones, is a self-righteous person,
Right.
instead of a person that was given so much grace and so much mercy,
Right.
because I had felt so much, because I was doing so much. I'd become self-righteous,
Yeah.
even to the point where I'd hurt people close to me, by judging them
Mhm.
and hurting, and really hurting them, tearing them down, even to the point where my own grandmother made her cry for something that she did. That
Yeah.
it just gotten to that point. I'm not afraid or shameful to say that,
No,
but
it's
that's why
real.
we're here to help
It's real.
people.
It's
We're
real.
here to help
That's
people
right.
understand things. And so I believe that's why God allowed me to take some falls,
Yes, sir.
because he was teaching me, hey, you better be careful, because you need some grace and you need some mercy too.
Yes, sir.
Don't think that you're too spiritual to ever make mistakes, because you're making mistakes thinking you're too spiritual not to make a mistake.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And so what that did is that process taught me to be humble and to be and to extend that same grace and same mercy that, for whatever reason, I had received so much of and forgotten about.
Yeah.
In
Well,
past time.
I think in a quest to be right,
Right.
we lose sight of where we have gone wrong in the past, and in order to correct that, God has to sometimes put us down a path of hard knocks.
That's right.
And I said this in a message not too long ago. Matter of fact, it was at Brandon. Again, I just finished preaching 7 days there, so our 5 services there over the last 7 days. But Wednesday night, I talked about Adam and Eve when they fell, how they tried to clothe themselves with their environment and they tried to hide in that environment. And but what they failed to realize was that what they plucked out of that environment was eventually going to expose them, because when you pluck something from the source, it dies and it reveals really who you are.
That's right.
And what I didn't realize in that moment, because, some of those things happen when you're preaching, you get those revelations and God shows you things. You're like, wow, that's good. And then after I thought about it more, really what Adam and Eve was doing was they were trying to cover up themselves with self-righteousness. And they were trying to cover up their mistake so that maybe nobody saw it. And the way that people who are self-righteous do, they cover their flaws by pointing their fingers at others. And so in trying to fit in an environment and look the same as everybody else, they eventually would have revealed who they were. And God said, that's not going to work. I'm going to expose you in this environment, because when I expose you, then I can truly cover you with my covering. And so sometimes vulnerability and exposure has to happen so that we quit trying to cover ourselves with our own righteousness and we let God cover us with his righteousness.
And those are the conversations that me and you have been recently having a lot of.
Yeah.
And just like we discussed, I think it was yesterday, I believe that when you put on that persona and you try to put on that flawed view of, you don't make mistakes and you have it all together, and you put it all together because you feel like you have to represent something that you believe that should not be flawed, because you're in a certain position of the leadership or whatever you might be. I think you put yourself in a place that you have real problems that you need to deal with, and because they're covered up, that you can't deal with, because you can always put that coat on, to cover it up.
Yeah. Well, you can always. The sad thing is, you can always try to cover up in actions and duty and things of that nature that could be pure in intent, but in all actuality, you are only as effective as you are real.
That's it.
And if you want to be effective, that's one thing I prayed when I first came to when I came back to God. And I started ministry. The one thing that I prayed was I want to be effective. And then I started experiencing all these things, and I was wondering, my God, why am I experiencing these things? And then the Lord one day just told me, he said, I thought you said you want to be effective. And if you're going to be effective, you can't be effective if you can't be real.
That's it.
If you don't experience real things and you don't be real with people and be vulnerable, and sometimes that hurts you with people, especially religious people. But at the end of the day, who are we trying to please? God or the religious people or whatever, the self-righteous or whatever you want to say. So, those things happen. So you experience this, the first year of marriage is tough, and typically in most marriages, they are tough. Just go ahead and tell you right now. But as time progressed, you and Sister Zoe grew stronger together. You experienced some things together, and now you're serving together. And those experiences are bringing about where you're at right now, serving in youth ministry and being very effective in that. And it's only because you experienced those things that has allowed you to be effective. And so don't ever, I would say this to you. Now, your dad, your pastor, he's right. I'm wrong if he disagrees, but don't ever allow your past or your seasons of hardship, don't ever allow that to rob you of your effectiveness, because God gave you that testimony for a reason. Right. And so it's beautiful. And so you guys are serving now, and you got a beautiful family, a beautiful daughter, and it all came out of pain. It all came out of what you thought probably would never be freedom from addiction. I can only imagine what you felt in those moments of dire need and things of that nature. But God took a broken man and gave a beautiful testimony.
That's right.
And it's so powerful. Well, man, I'm glad you came on today.
Yes, sir. I'm glad I did.
I'm glad you told your story, and I'm glad you were real.
Yeah.
Because on this podcast, we only have real people.
That's it. Hey, you won't. My wife tells me sometimes you can sugarcoat it just a little.
Yeah.
I said, I only know one way to be, and that's to be real.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like you said, sometimes it costs you with people that can be judgmental or might want to have a different view of you. But if I have real problems, then I need to really handle them.
Yeah.
But if I'm really doing good, then I'm really doing good.
You're really doing good. Yeah. And I think sometimes we try to hide that. We try to hide the fact that we struggle. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe we should air out everything, but at the same time, I think people ought to know that we're real.
That's right.
We should never. I think some of the problems in ministry nowadays is that we have separated them from real people, and we're supposed to be, as ministers, and their families are supposed to be. I heard it said as a kid growing up, ministries lives in a glass house, and I understand the context of that to a degree, but what I've tried to accomplish in my ministry is that I want people to understand that I may live in a glass house, but you need to understand that in that glass house is a real human being.
That's right.
And you're going to see real struggles from that human. You put me in the glass house. Mm-hmm. I didn't ask to be there. Okay. God called me to be a minister of his gospel, not to live in a glass house. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you put me in a glass house, that's fine. But you need to understand that you're going to see some struggles in my life, and you're going to see some failures in my life that you deal with, because I'm just as human as you are.
I had told my wife, and I know we're wrapping this up, but I told my wife, and I know I shared it with you the other day. I told my wife that, I just, I feel like there is a pressure to put on, they say you put on your ministry face.
Yeah.
Well, and I believe that there is a certain way to conduct yourself.
Yes.
Just like anywhere in the business place, and there's a certain way to conduct yourself. But I told her, I've gotten to the place, Brother Jones, where I won't put on some fake persona that everything's okay and everything's all right. But everything will be okay.
Yeah.
And everything will be all right.
Yeah.
And in that, and I told my young people this, I said, you'll never see that out of me again. You'll see the realest version of me. And in that, and even my wife, I said, you might see more flaws, but that's more things that I'll really have to deal with at the feet of Jesus. And that's more things that I'm going to really deal with, because when we put on that facade, we don't have to deal with it anymore because we don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
But when it really comes to the face front of things, we have to go deal with those
Well,
things.
you know, we put on this fake facade at times in front of people, but our family deals with it. When they see us leading so spectacularly,
That's right.
They say, well, that's not the man I see at home. That's not the man that I was just arguing with an hour ago that said some things that hurt my feelings because it was pent up inside because he'd been hiding it, or vice versa. We put pressure on them to be something sometimes that it's just so much that they just can't be. It seems so hard to do. And then they say things that hurts us. And so it's just, and vice versa, and all that, just whatever. We're real. Mm-hmm. We're real people.
That's right.
With real problems. But here's the thing. We're leading you by being real.
Right.
So that you understand that your real problems are not things you know, and we've talked about this just lately. We have to understand that this is not some ladder we're climbing to be some kind of spectacular thing. We're just all real human beings trying to serve God and be who God called us to be. And I think we've created a corporate ladder in the church, and that's the furthest thing God wanted for ministry.
Yeah. But
it's because we have to climb a ladder, and in order to do that, we lose who we really are in the process.
And I think that me and you discussed yesterday, and discussing that ladder, that this is not some ladder that, hey, they're above me in this thing, and we just got to take one more step to get above them. Paul said that this is a race.
Yeah.
And in a race, we're all on the same level playing ground.
That's exactly right.
But we're in different, we're players in different positions,
right.
Doing different things.
Yep.
And some are running faster, and some are tripping, and some are falling, but we're all heading in that same direction.
Same direction.
And so sometimes we got to grab each other's hand and pull each other up.
Yeah.
And so that's what matters.
Well, I think if we keep sight of that, if we really keep sight of that, man, I've been hurt more by people who are trying to climb a ladder.
Stepping over my back.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And here's the sad reality. If we're not careful, we all get stuck in that mode of trying to fulfill something that isn't even God.
We can be that person too.
Yep. Well, we've stepped on fingers of others.
That's it.
We've stepped on heads of others. And you know what? We forgot what it felt like when someone did it to us. But we did it. And then when I can remember when God started dealing with me about this whole, thing of being real and walking with him real and genuinely, I look back at some things and I go, God, forgive me.
Yeah.
Forgive me, because I got it wrong.
That's
a lot more than I pretended I got it right. I got it wrong a lot more.
And the thing is, when you're in that moment, you really think you got it right.
Oh, you think you think you're the stuff.
Oh, you
bro.
got it going on.
Man, this is so good. And we could talk forever.
That's it. We can.
But you'll have to just come back and we'll have to talk some more. Yeah. But I really wanted this to be focused on your testimony. You have a beautiful, beautiful testimony, and of how God brought you out of so much bondage. And you share a unique perspective to the drug addiction aspect of God lets you see some things that go on behind the scenes in the spiritual realm of drug addiction, and that there's a spirit realm to everything. And a lot of people don't get that. A lot of people don't see that, but God allowed you to experience something and to have a testimony to share with others. Hey, you're entertaining things you don't even realize you're entertaining.
Yeah.
But
and I believe that I truly believe, Brother Jones, that God allowed me to see those things so that I can understand people that's going to be coming out. Because in this last day, Brother Jones, there are so many people that's wrapped up in that, and we're going to see those people coming back.
Yep.
And there's going to be a lot of prodigals that's coming back from that.
Yep.
And I believe it's going to be people like me and you and people like Marshall Prince that have seen those things, have an understanding of how to deal with those things.
Yep.
And that can help them.
Yep. Well, man, thank you for coming on. We'll definitely have you back on.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate you, and I love you.
Love you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed having this conversation. Until next week, may God bless you. We'll talk to you again then.